Great day, great day. This is Tammy J with The Texture of Me. Welcome to the show. Our show provides a place where people can voice their experiences and having dealt with discrimination because of the texture of their hair. Great day, great day. This is Tammy J with The Texture of Me. Welcome to The Texture of Me. We have the awesome pleasure of having Dr. Dawn Bennett Alexander. Oh, so exciting to have her. Oh my gosh, welcome. How you doing today?
Oh, Tammy, thank you. And thank you for doing this work. Thank you for the invitation. I feel so privileged and honored.
Thank you so much for being here. I want to share who you are for me. Who you are is, I would say, even the pioneer. Such an influence on bringing diversity in the corporate arena. I saw your TED Talk, loved it, so awesome. And, your company, Practical Diversity, I love that because I love the way you brought diversity and had it to be practical. And we can use it in so many things.
Yeah.
And your book, Environment of Business, that's phenomenal. Talked about how having diversity, in every chapter.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times people don't look at corporate world needing diversity, and the way you bring it, it just makes it seamless and easy, and anyone can do it. And I'm not gonna lie, I can go on and on about who you are for me, but I just thank you and such a privilege to being with you.
Tammy, I love it that you love that. And even our short journey together, actually, it's been a kind of long journey, even though we haven't been in touch, but I love the way that happened because I reached out because of the work that I had seen in a magazine or something that you had done. And it was like, oh my gosh, that goes with the kind of stuff that I do. And I just want to be a support system for somebody who's out there doing that work. Because I remember when there was nobody doing that work, and there's still so many niches to find, and you found one. And I loved it that you gave voice to it. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Because I really got, one of the things that's been missing a gap based, even doing on my research and my dissertation, there's that mental part no one talks about. And I remember, doing my research, trying to find relating to hair and psychology. I'm like, how does it go together? But then when I had my own personal experience, that's when I saw
Mhm.
something there. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm. Absolutely related.
Yes.
Absolutely related.
Yes. Could you
Yeah.
share with us what your journey was and going natural? Or even how long you've been natural? I don't know.
Yeah, since
Yeah.
1968,
Okay.
Thanksgiving of 1968. It was my freshman year of college, and I went home with a friend. I lived in DC. We were in Ohio, but she had an aunt that lived in Indiana, so that was closer. And we decided to go there. And I didn't remember this, but the friend I was with said that I said to her one day, "Why don't we go get our hair cut?" And we were at a small, predominantly white college in Ohio, Defiance College in Defiance, Ohio. And we had gotten perms, of course, before we went off to school. But after we got there and our hair started to grow out, it's like, oh my God, what are we going to do now? Because there was nobody in town that would do our hair.
Wow.
So it was the beginning of the Black Power movement on college campuses. And I wasn't dealing with that at all. But it's like if it gave me an excuse to get my hair cut or do something different with it, then so I didn't have to deal with this issue, I would do it. And I'll tell you why it became a pressing issue for us. We decided that we would try to do it on our own. And we lived in a dorm. So we were in the kitchen dorm, a dorm kitchen, and we were doing our hair. And all of a sudden we hear somebody coming down the hall, white, who's like, is something burning? Like, do we all need to evacuate the building? And it was probably 5 or 6 of us in that kitchen doing our hair, just taking turns. None of us had ever really done this before. And we were humiliated. And nobody really said anything, but we all knew we were all having our own moment with what it is that had just happened. And
Mm.
she looked in the kitchen, it had a glass door at the top. And she said, "Oh, what are you doing?" And when the idea that we could cut our hair and be stylish presented itself, that's what we did. And we were the first ones to do it. We came back on campus from the break. And I have to tell you, Tammy, because this is part of the journey, we were, I'm going to say a hit, but I'm not going to characterize good or bad hit. What we did was so outrageous for the time in 1968 until people just didn't even know how to take it. They just sort of stared at us at first. And there were people who eventually would say, "What did you do to your hair?" Because white folk didn't know anything about this. Black folk knew what was going on, but they didn't know how they were supposed to take this because it was thought of as a radical thing to do. We had grown up with, you have to keep your hair in check.
Yeah.
That means it has to be permed or it has to be pressed and everything has to be in order. And I never liked that anyway. I didn't like having to think about what style I was going to wear it in and all of that. So this suited me fine. And we look like a hot mess, right? I'm so glad that we took pictures that day in one of those little booths because they are such a reminder, because we had cut it down to the perm. And that has to grow out, but then those ends have to come off. So we had this natural hair, and then we had these little pieces sticking up that were perfectly straight. And it was not until about 45 years later that the person who was in charge of the Black group on campus said to me, "When you all walk back on that campus, it took everything back up, back to a totally different level." They became the biggest place of small Ohio colleges. And I don't know if you know, but Ohio has a whole lot of small colleges. They became sort of the epicenter of the Black Power movement on college campuses in the Midwest. And as a part of it, it was our hair just sort of took them to that new level and boosted it. And it wasn't what we had done it for, but it was what it was. It was all a product of the time. And I have kept my hair natural ever since. I've never straightened it since 1968.
Wow.
And the only thing I've done is have dreadlocks, which I started again. I've let them grow until it's just like too much hair for me. But I got them again Thursday, so I'll grow them.
Amazing. I love it. Yes.
Yeah, see how much I can take this time around.
Awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, what a journey. And did you experience any mental things, or did you experience anything like that for yourself when you did the whole, well, we call it big chop now, right?
Yeah. It has a name now, right? First time I saw that, I said, "Oh my God, they have a name for this." Wow. I think if I were the average sort of female that was really into hair, like my sisters were. I have 3 sisters. They all cared about this. I didn't care about it. So for me, I probably didn't have as much of an adjustment as many people did, although I appreciated what they were going through and how big a deal this was for them. It wasn't as big a deal for me because I just didn't care about that stuff. And I sort of have a way of thinking about what other people think of what I'm doing as that's theirs, not mine. So I'm not going to take that on. But I have been in a lot of different contexts. Today is February 22nd of 22. I retired after 34 years at the University of Georgia on February 1st, 2021. And before that, I'd been in another university. And before that, I was practicing law. So, and I have done internships, for instance, in corporate settings. So I've had a large amount of experience of being in that workplace and having people and interviewing and all of that stuff. My hair is nothing I ever think about. It's like you get with the program or you don't. I mean, it doesn't even rise to the level of a thought. But again, I appreciate the fact that everybody doesn't think like I do, and they're not given the privilege of being able to think about it the way I do, because choices are made about them that end up making their hair an issue.
Yeah.
Which is why I was willing to fight about that. Because even though it wasn't an issue for me, I understood that it was for the vast majority of people. And it was an issue that did not need to be dealt with. And that was part of what my experience exhibited. I
Mm,
go in and I do the work that I'm doing, and I don't have to worry about this. And that leaves me free to be able to do the work that I'm doing instead of constantly feeling like people are judging me because of what's on my head. It's like that is so irrelevant. That's like, what color stockings do I have on? Who cares? Right? I'm just here to
right.
do what it is that I'm here to do. And it's no, it's that simple for me.
Mm. Yeah, I really appreciate that because I think about I was having a conversation with my cohort, and a lot of them are from Africa.
Mm.
And traditionally, if they went to a school, they just automatically had their hair cut off.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
was like, so did you deal with anything mentally? No, that was just the thing to do. We were going to go to the school. We knew we cut our hair off.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
then, my assumption is so they can focus on their studies and things like that.
Mhm.
It's just, and I get it. And then I have another friend of mine, she's Muslim, and she said she doesn't ever have to worry about her hair because she's always covered.
Always covered. Yeah. Yeah. I think probably one of the biggest surprises for me when I went to Africa, and I lived there for 10 months on a Fulbright fellowship with my daughters. One of the things that was most surprising is that I wore my hair natural. And that's something that many African women did not want to do. They
Mhm,
ran in the other direction from that.
mm,
And I don't know to this day if I've really processed that quite the way it needs to be processed.
mhm.
Because, your whole life you're thinking about going to the motherland, and then you go, so you can feel at home. And
Right.
then you go and you see these people wearing skin lightening cream
Mm,
and having hair that is an attempt to deal with the Western version of what hair, Eurocentric version of what hair should be.
mm,
And that just took a lot of getting used to for me, and they do such incredibly beautiful work with braids and
yes.
all sorts of natural hair. But yet that was the vast majority of them that I saw, and I traveled around while I was in on the continent.
Mm,
They were not trying to go there with me
mm.
having this natural hair. That just wasn't. And it's so funny because they were in fact used to it from the time they were young, which may be why they decided to go all the way in the other direction, because it's like, okay, I've done my time with that, and I'm ready to bust out and try to do something else now. But
Right.
yeah, that was a real surprise that
Wow.
I was usually the only one in the room with natural hair.
Yeah. Wow. That's something. And, just having the conversations with them, I told them next time we'll look to have them on the podcast to talk about, you know,
Oh, that would be really interesting.
right. Because one of
Yeah.
my cohorts, she had cut all her hair off, and I was like, "Why you did?" She said, "I was stressed out, so it was time." And I was like, for me, I'd have been like, that would never have been a consideration for me.
Wow.
I'm like, "Cut
Wow.
what?" I'm like, I'm tormented by that.
Oh
And
my
I
gosh. When I look at women who have shaved their heads, usually in our culture, if you've done that, it's because you have cancer and you've actually lost your hair, right?
right,
And every time I see them, I think about what that journey must be like for them. Because for me, that would not be a problem at all.
right.
But for them, if hair has always taken that place in your life of just, so much being dependent upon it, including your beauty, I mean, for me, it would be nothing, but for them, it must be huge. And
Mm,
I get it, if nothing else, even if you didn't feel like you were that wedded to it, the truth is, it's what you're used to and what you're used to seeing. So the idea of a woman who does not have that hair is huge. And let me tell you, 2 years ago, my daughter took me to India for 2 weeks. I want you to know I could not go in the bathroom. They stopped me. Security stopped me because I had short natural hair. And I said, but I'm a female. And they said, no, this is the women's bathroom. And I said, I'm a female. I had a dress on and everything.
wow.
And they said, no, your hair is short. I said, but I'm a female. I'm American. So, we're not going by the same rules here.
Right.
I had to go buy earrings. And I had left my earrings by a mistake in one of the hotel rooms. I had to go to the market and buy earrings so they would look at me and know that I was a female because of my hair. So after that, I asked several Indian women about it. And they said, oh, you never cut your hair. I said, what if you just want to wear it a different way? They said, no, you don't want to wear it a different way in this culture. You want your hair long. And if you wanted to cut it, it would be considered a shameful thing and you would be shaming your family as well. Just to
Wow.
wear a different kind of hairstyle. Isn't that amazing?
It's amazing how hair plays such a significant role in all of our lives and
Yeah.
culture.
Yeah.
And
One of the things that I think is so interesting about ours as Black females in the society is that we have always been policed for our hair.
mm,
And I say Black women, but Black males too, but because more emphasis is always put on Black women and their appearance than it is Black men or men in general, we bear the brunt of that.
mm,
So when they put us on ships. In Africa, we had different kinds of hairstyles, and they would actually demonstrate certain kinds of status that we had, whether you were married, whether you were single, whether you were of means, or you didn't have a lot of money. And one of the things that they did as soon as they got us into were putting us into the hulls of ships, was to cut the hair off. It was a way of cutting off all the distinctions between the tribes, of
mhm.
shaming us, and according to them, it was for purposes of preventing lice and stuff. Well, once we got here, and this is one of the things that just knocks me out every time I think about it, they just didn't want to see our hair.
Mm,
So they passed laws. If you think about it, most of the pictures that you see of people who were enslaved or depictions of any kind, they usually have something around their head.
yeah, they do.
Because even if it wasn't a law, which it was in some places, other places by social custom, we had to cover our heads. Not only did they not allow us to have the kinds of things that we would normally have to take care of our hair, but they simply didn't want to see it. So it was like, cover that up because I don't want to see that.
Wow.
Well, when you think about it, it also went all the way to the other extent in places like New Orleans, where they had laws that prevented Black women who attracted men, especially if they were mixed. They attracted men's gazes. So they created laws saying that they could not wear certain things in their hair. They couldn't, they're usually what you see as a hair tie of some kind is white. It's a white kerchief of some kind.
Right.
In New Orleans, it was like it was on and popping. Whatever piece of fabric you could get, you were going to use. And like Black folk always do, we use our imaginations. We dressed up what we had. We made it work, and we made it so they were actually looking at us because it looked so good. So then the laws said you could not wear that sort of thing. It couldn't be fancy. It couldn't be in any way detailed with feathers or beads or anything like that. So all the way from the beginning, we have had our hair policed
Mm,
up to today when they're now creating laws that recognize that that policing was in fact going on, and it was deleterious to us because it could keep us from doing something like being able to get a job or hold a job if we had it, but changed our hairstyle.
mm.
And now passing laws that say you cannot make decisions in a workplace on the basis of somebody's natural hair.
Yes. Wow. So much enriched in history we have here. Just I love it. I love it. Wow. Wow.
Yeah. Well, it's one of the things that I think too that if more people knew about that history, they would feel differently about their hair journey. When I was growing up, one of the worst things you could say to somebody is, nappy hair. You
Mhm.
nappy headed, whatever. Nappy is not a bad thing to me. It's like, yeah, and what else?
Right.
Nappy hair, brown skin. You act like that's a bad thing to say.
Yeah.
That to me is not a negative. I refuse to buy into the ideas that somebody else holds when they are not my ideas.
Mhm.
So, and I think a lot of the feeling that people have around their hair is a feeling of shame. And why wouldn't they have that if that's what we've been taught all this time?
Right.
If we've been taught to be ashamed, to have our hair be unruly in some way, to not have it looking totally good, then we feel shamed about it. And I refuse to let that happen.
Mm. I love that the way that you said their own ideal, that how we've, I noticed how we've taken it on, even to a point where one of my classmate cohort, she was telling me through the pandemic, she decided to go natural.
Mhm.
And her dad was like, "Baby, you okay? You okay,
Oh,
baby?"
absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, that's just a classic, what's going on with your hair?
Right.
Okay, what's going on with your hair?
Yeah.
Because that is the thought that you have to keep that hair in check.
Mm,
Yeah,
mm.
and when you make the decision to step out of that, when I did it, my dad, we had grown up with my dad, because he had 4 girls, one of the things that we always heard was, a woman's hair is her crowning glory. So you can imagine how well it went over when I decided to cut my hair. So so I told my mother that weekend when we were away for Thanksgiving, I told her, I said, "I cut my hair." And she said, "Okay." She said, "How is it?" I said, "It's in a natural." And she said, and this is again at a time when people just didn't have naturals, right?
Right.
And she said, "Okay, I'll talk to your father about it, but
Wow.
let me talk to him first." So when I came home for Christmas 2 weeks later, I didn't get any flack about it. He teased me a bit about it because, of course, we'd had this lifetime of a woman's hair is her crowning glory, but neither one of them ever gave me a negative feedback about it. And before I knew it, all of my other sisters were wearing naturals as well, and I was the baby daughter, but all of them ended up doing it too.
Mm. It sounded like it was something that was actually liberating, though.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, just not even to have to worry about it, my hair going back in the rain was liberating, not to have to worry about a place to get it done. It
Mm.
was, in fact, I brought the clippers on campus for females. Somebody had given them to me as a gift. And we would just sit up in the room, and the only thing we were doing was just shaping stuff up. We weren't trying to do anything to try to change our hair. We were just, shaping it. It was the time of big frozen stuff. And we had a great time doing that. So it was very liberating in that sense. And as you can imagine, it did feel better when you got to see more and more people doing it. And then when Angela Davis came out, it was like on and popping. And it just so happened her brother was in school with us. So
Oh,
we felt it
wow.
probably even more than most people did, but it was like it validated the choice we had made about our hair.
Mm. Man, that is so beautiful.
Mhm.
I love the way how you bring history to all of this. And it's like, what is it like seeing what's going on? Because I know that we have the Crown Act and everything. What is your take on all that you're seeing that's happening from then to now?
Yeah, it is amazing to live history that way. And despite the fact that we have had this huge backlash against really the Obama presidency, and we're seeing it pop up in all different sorts of ways, increases in violence, physical violence, increases in police and the way they deal with us, despite the fact that George Floyd had his tragedy 2 years ago almost. Um, there has been progress, just, I mean, huge amounts of progress. I want people to keep pushing for more.
Mhm.
People are like, what do they want? Why aren't they ever satisfied? Well, because we're still being killed in unprecedented numbers for doing nothing. We're still called out for doing nothing, by the Karens of the world. And our looks are still being policed. So to go from a time when this was so drastically different. I mean, to do what I did, cutting something as simple as the personal choice to
Mm.
cut my hair in 1968, that could have gotten me killed as being an uppity nigger.
Mm.
Just a few years earlier, remember the 64 Civil Rights Act passed in 64 and became effective in 65. This was only 3 years later. And when I say only 3 years later, 3 years sounds like a long time, but it's not in the scheme of a country. And think about something like 1954 was the first Supreme Court decision outlawing segregated schools. I taught at the University of Georgia. It was not integrated until 1961.
Wow.
The buses were integrated in, excuse me, like 54, 55. Did you want to be the first one to sit on the front of that bus? Uh-uh. No, I mean, I don't care what the law says. I got to live here with these people, and I'm the one getting on this bus right now. And I know what my place is going to be if I don't want my butt beat and somebody challenged. So these things take a long time for people to get used to. And what is amazing is to look back at it and see, think about it. We're just talking about hair. We're not talking
Mhm.
about jobs. We're
Right.
not talking about housing. We're not talking about education. We're not talking about politics. We're just talking about the personal idea of what you want your hair to look like. But
Wow.
it's all tied up in history, and it's all tied up. That tide changing is something that is miraculous, even though we have not gotten where we want to be with it. For instance, the Dove Acts. I was really glad that Dove, for its own personal reasons, banded together with people to introduce the legislation, the Crown Acts, all over the country. But the truth is, we should have a federal law about that. One of the arguments I made in the 2015, which was just before the first Crown Act was passed in New York, the argument that I made was that this is a type of race discrimination based on stereotyping. That argument was new. Nobody had ever proposed that before. We had said it's not good, but nobody had ever proposed that it was actually something that should be recognized by an existing law.
Mm.
And the reason it should have been was because they had done the same thing with gender.
Mm.
All of those categories, gender, race, religion, all of those are part of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. And
Right.
they had already said that stereotyping as a type of discrimination for gender would be recognized by law when you held women to different standards. So you said, in the case that went to the Supreme Court, and they had rejected the woman for partnership at her accounting firm, Price Waterhouse. The partners had said, oh, she should dress more femininely, act more femininely, get her hair cut and style. She should not cuss. She should wear more jewelry. And the court looked at that and said, that's stereotyping based on gender. And Title 7 says you can't do that. It says you can't discriminate on the basis of gender, and this stereotyping is a type of discrimination. So we're not going to allow you to do it. Well, to me, doing the same thing with our hair that is racially based and connected to us, that
Mm.
was just not a weird legal argument to make. As a lawyer, I felt totally comfortable with being able to make that argument as similarly situated. But it was not anything that the court had upheld until that time. Now, because of the acts that were, instead of allowing this to be of Title VII, part of Title VII, federal law that applies to all of the states, it's happened to be a part of every state's law. So instead of passing it one time, you got to pass it 50 different times. And in fact, more than 50, because there are jurisdictions, local jurisdictions, that have accepted that as the way they want to do business. So, for instance, the city of New York passed it. It was just the city of New York.
Wow.
And then the state of California passed it. Then New York came back and passed it for the entire state. So all of it becomes important, and looking at it and watch it progress is so incredibly instructive. It feels good. It feels awful when you see, as we have over the past 5 or 6 years since Trump took office, actually since he started running for office in 2015, we saw this regression of things that we thought had been settled decades before. As it
Mm.
turns out, not so much. And I can't blame him for all of that because, people were doing what they felt to do. And if they didn't feel it, they wouldn't have allowed him to talk him into it.
Right.
But you can see how it would make you feel like, was all that we saw that we thought was progress really progress? Or were we just sort of dragging people along? And I have to tell you, when you've got basic rights that you're talking about, people being denied, I don't mind dragging them along. I don't mind that. I would love for you to do it because you think it's the right thing to do and out of the goodness of your heart. But the
Yeah.
truth is, if you don't want to do that and it's legal to do, which is what this stuff is,
Mm.
then I don't mind them passing a law and say you're going to have to obey this. That's what Title VII was all about. The whole civil rights law, Title VII specifically deals with the workplace. But that's what it was about. People were not at the time that it was passed. They were in the throes of segregation. Jim Crow was the law of the land. And
Mm.
even black folk, majority of black folk said, a civil rights law? Mm-mm, don't do that. Because they would prefer the devil they knew. They were afraid. They had every reason to be afraid. And the fear came from knowing that if they stepped out of their place, that there would be hell to pay for it. And as it turns out, many people did. They had just watched what happened to soldiers who had come back from fighting World War II, who in their uniforms, when they expected to be treated like human beings, were instead lynched. And then after the 54 school desegregation case, they saw what happened to people like Emmett Till, where the message was very clear: y'all are not equal and don't try to act like you are.
Mm.
And so, the idea of not wanting to have a civil rights law, yeah, right, because I know they're going to kill me if we have one. And if I act like I'm supposed to under that law, which is equal to them. So, I don't want to do it. So when you say, like, how does it feel to see those differences? It feels incredibly wonderful. And there are a lot of lessons in there too about patience, realizing that things don't happen overnight, that when you're talking about millions of people, we're up to what, 200 or 300 million people in this country now. Everybody's at a different place about these issues. So we are not all going to be in the same place. It takes time and it is annoying. We don't want it to take time. It's like, seriously, it takes time for you to learn to treat me like a human being? Like, don't you already know how to do that? I know you do because I see you doing it with the folk that you do care about. But the truth is, that's the reality of it. And as long as it finally gets there, I'm okay with that, even though I would love for it to happen sooner rather than later.
Wow. Thank you for that. That was history. I just love it. So the wisdom, so awesome. Wow. Wow. Yeah. And I just really think about, what you're doing and as far as diversity in the workplace and how it's much needed. And I can see expanding more. And that's why even with our hair is, it's a big deal and it's not a big deal in the sense of it's our hair. Like, why does it have to be a big deal? But it
Yeah,
is in a big deal, you know?
yeah.
Yeah.
You know, the approach I take to the workplace doing diversity stuff is, and there's room for everything, but I've been at this long before diversity was ever a word that we used in connection with this. And 40 years ago, came from practicing law to teaching it to create a class called employment law. That was sort of the working title of it. The truth is, the class didn't exist, so they weren't quite sure what to call it, but because it was about something in employment, they thought, okay. But the person who had brought me in was the head of the Public Employee Relations Commission in New York, a white guy, and he had seen when cases of unfair labor practices came up, there were consistently these certain kinds of cases, issues that got ignored. And he couldn't understand what was going on. And it was cases of race and cases of gender. They weren't even dealing with the LGBT issue yet, right? This was like 1980s, early 80s. So when he retired and went to Florida and started teaching at the University of North Florida, he asked if he could have someone create a class that would sort of deal with this. He wasn't quite sure what this was, but he
Mm.
just knew that it was not right to ignore this stuff. And the person who had been his assistant there was now at the agency I was working for, the Federal Labor Relations Authority. So when he approached me about being able to send my resume to this person for teaching, teaching was nothing I wanted to do. I didn't know what the stuff was. I went back and said, y'all, they're talking about teaching employment law to a room full of labor lawyers. And they were like, what is that? We never heard of it. Well, they ended up choosing me to do it. I decided to do it. And very quickly, that first year, I started doing consulting, which was totally outside of what I had come there to do. But I had to do it because I forgot that I wasn't going to have money in the summertime. And when I asked my colleagues what I should do, they said, well, go to continuing ed and see if they can put together a seminar for you so you can make some money. And when I went and they asked me what you teach, I told them and they said, okay, well, make up a flyer. And I'm like, I teach this stuff. It's academic. Like, what are you talking about? But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that the cases showed that the reason they were cases in the first place, because I'm a lawyer, cases is what I look at so we can deconstruct those and figure out what went wrong so we can avoid that, right? So
Right.
by this time, I'd been teaching it for 2 semesters. And when the summer came along and I created this class, I realized from the questions that people were asking me that the class was something that people did not know at all. And then I started getting asked to do it, but it was really clear that it wasn't that they didn't know the law and it wasn't that they were malicious. They knew the law, they sort of knew you weren't supposed to discriminate. What they didn't know was when they were doing it.
Mm.
And that led me to a very different place about it because I didn't even need to teach you the law. You knew from the beginning, I'm not supposed to discriminate on a basis of race, color, religion, gender, national origin. But you didn't recognize when it was happening. So when you tell this person, okay, you can come work here. Yes, we're giving you the offer, but you have to cut your dreadlocks off that person had been growing for 10 years
Mm.
in order to be able to accept the offer and come here and work. You didn't realize that that was illegal to do. You didn't realize that that was a type of race discrimination. Or when you say this happened to one of my students who had done an internship for a whole year. And when she went in to do the test or the chat about whether she was going to get the actual offer, they said she had been incredibly wonderful at the internship and they were extending the offer to her. But they just went on and on about how good she was. And finally, the capper was, you were so good that if you had been a guy, we would have paid you 50% more. And they said it as if it was some sort of gift to her, compliment, and didn't realize that, in fact, that was discrimination,
Mm.
gender discrimination.
Right.
So finding that out really early on, like that first summer after I went into teaching, made my approach to this a completely different approach. I don't approach it as if people are maliciously, intentionally discriminating. There
Mm.
are those who do that, but that's not most people who want to get that check every 2 weeks.
Right.
Most of us, you're going to do what you need to do to keep that job.
Right.
So if you tell them this is the kind of stuff you cannot do, they won't do it. Now, what they do after 5 o'clock, when they go home, I'm not interested in that. What I care about is what do you do at work so that you don't get the employer in trouble.
Mm.
And what we bring into that gets the employer in trouble, we realize is the ideas that are in our head. It's
Mm.
what we learned about women. It's what we learned about Black women and their hair. That's what's the basis of that decision, not some policy by the employer, but the
Right.
stuff that's in our head that interprets what it is we're seeing in front of us and lets us make a decision. So, my idea of teaching people to do the heart work that it takes to change how they see people, to realize that their reality is not the only reality. And they have to stretch out and see another reality because failure to do so can end up in serious litigation that is embarrassing and costly, ends up being a very different approach than just, yelling at somebody, you're a bunch of racists and sexists and, misogynists and homophobes, and you need to get your act together. That's not where I come from. To me, my life motto is it's all about love. And when you care about people, when you care about who it is that you're dealing with in that workplace every day to get the best product you can for your employer, whatever that product is, you'll do the right thing.
Right.
And I can help you if you didn't know you were doing the right thing. If you want to not do that, I got two suggestions for you. One is go find another job somewhere else where they don't have these kind of requirements. Good luck with that.
Mhm.
Or get with the program,
Right.
right? So you can continue to get your check and keep your private stuff private that you didn't even realize you were imposing on other people in that workplace.
Wow.
Yeah.
And
And that's why, that's why I called it practical diversity. You know how to do this, and it allows you to do it on your own. Nobody has to stand over you and make you do it. The thing is, what do I do about all of this diversity stuff? You think about what you need to think about when you're making decisions about people. Check yourself about that and then govern yourself accordingly. And most people don't really go through that process before they say something like, cut those dreadlocks off, or we would have paid you more than 50% more if you were a male. They just don't think about it. They don't think about that connection. And that's what I want to get them to do. And I do it through having them examine the kind of ideas they have in their head.
Mm. Yeah, I love the way your company practical diversity, those questions, figure out what your message is. And that part I thought about, like, think about what you're going to say or think about what you're thinking. Because I realize that people are not thinking if they just blurt it out. Right. And then stop being
Yes.
so judgmental, And the third
Yeah.
one was like, just treat others as they would like to be treated, the golden rule. So,
Yeah.
yeah. And you can take that with anything. And I love it that,
Anything.
yes. And even with the hair thing, it's just like, I'll just go into briefly, but I saw a company where they had a picture and they said, this is good hair. And then it happened to be a young lady who's very fair skinned. She's a Black woman, very fair skinned. She could be Latino, and she has blue eyes and blonde hair. And for me in the salon, I see it, I'm just like, but they don't know what they just did, And so,
And that's my first assumption. That's my first assumption, that they didn't understand what they just did.
right,
Yeah. Especially for a company that wants to make money.
right,
I mean, you really want to make money you think you're going to get that by insulting me?
right,
And it does not have to be. You could send 1,000 messages out for your product without that one being one of them.
right,
But you see too, Tammy, why it's so important who's sitting around that table making the decision about what we're going to do.
right,
Because it's sort of like garbage in, garbage out. If all of those people see the world the same way, then that's what comes out of that. And the question is like, what's the problem with that? Well, if you had me sitting there, I could have told you very quickly and easily what the problem with that was. And we've seen faux pas. One was just probably about 3 years ago. I can't remember. One of the big singers had like Christina Aguilera or somebody in that genre, put out I think they were shoes that ended up looking like they had blackface. They had to recall them all.
yeah,
Okay, it's so much easier to just pay somebody who is there in your space that will be able to give you a heads up about stuff like that. And the truth is, if you were really hiring the way you should, they should have been around the table anyway.
right,
And what you said makes so much sense. People not thinking about it, because if they thought about it at that moment when somebody says, for instance, you have to cut your dreads, if you ask right then, what is your thought about the dreads that makes it so it's inconsistent with this person being here to have this position that you have open, that you said they were qualified for, and in fact asked them to work to do? If you thought about it, they're most likely they would say, they're in fact this person, and you don't usually get this in a case, but this was wonderful. The person said to her, well, they don't look clean and yours look fine. I'm not talking about you, but you know
wow,
what I mean.
Wow.
No, I don't know what you mean because I look like just like you see me in front of you for my interview, which is where you're putting your best foot forward. That's
Mhm.
the way mine will always look.
Right.
So the idea of me coming in or your idea about what people in general, your idea of
Mm.
what people in general who have dreads do is not applicable here.
Right.
You're talking to me.
Right.
But the myths, they're dirty, unkempt, they get out of control. They mean you take drugs. I mean, all you smoke reefer. What am I going in the bathroom and token up or something? All of that's what's in somebody's head.
Right.
That's what's there. So they're the shortcut, the conclusion is so you have to cut your dreadlocks. But when you look at what's in their head about dreadlocks, that's where you see the work needs to be done. And that's just a matter of information.
Mm.
Me teaching you, no, it's not a matter at all
Right.
of hygiene unless that person is somebody who is just a person that doesn't want to deal with hygiene. It's not
Right.
because of the dreads and the choice to have dreads. I mean, me getting these put in last Thursday didn't mean all of a sudden I don't take a shower. All of,
Right.
or all of a sudden I don't wash my hair. Or all of a sudden I'm going out looking for somebody to sell me some weed. I mean, people just don't think, and that's exactly what you said, sort of not being intentional. They don't think about it. But once they think, and I have done this thousands of times at workplaces, individuals, once they think about it, they're like, oh my God, what was I thinking?
Mm.
One of the things that's most fun about doing those exercises with people is what they discover about themselves and the
Mm.
messages that they have taken in
Mm.
because they didn't know. And I swear, one of my favorites, there are two favorites I have out of the thousands that I've heard. One is the guy who had grown up in a town that did not permit Black folk to live there. So when I asked him what his messages were growing up about race, he said that he didn't have any. And given where he told me he had grown up and the era he had grown up in, that just simply could not have been true. So I said to him, are you sure you didn't get any messages growing up? And he said, excuse me, and he was an older white guy about to retire. And he said, no. He said, they didn't allow Black people to live in the town that I grew up in. So I didn't have any messages about race. And
Wow.
he couldn't understand why everybody was laughing initially until he stopped and thought about it. And he was like, that was one of those smack your forehead moments, right? And
Mm.
he immediately, first he laughed once he realized what he was saying. And then he got real serious and he said, I feel awful
Mm.
because he said, I'm about to retire and I have treated Black people so badly for all the time I've been in the workplace because of something I didn't even know was in my head.
Wow.
Something I didn't even know was in my head. And then the other one was a guy who was dealing with disabilities. He was in charge of them for his workplace. And
Mm.
when we were talking about the messages about disabilities, he said that he was from Africa originally, and he said that in his village, if somebody was disabled when they were born, that you put them out in the jungle and just let the animals devour them.
Wow.
And yeah, he said because they were thought to be bad luck. So it just hit him when we were talking about this, just like with the guy about race. First time he ever connected that that was still in his head, and he was in charge of the disability folk at his workplace.
Wow.
So, I mean, it's powerful, powerful stuff. And think about it. I'm just talking about what messages you picked up growing up, not which ones you had or what your parents taught you, not just your parents, because you get messages from
Right.
all over.
Right.
So, there's no ownership here. There's no, I have to feel bad. I have to feel guilty. No, you were taking in messages like just like everybody else who read that bus and saw that bus sign, right?
Right.
And once you take away that shame and stuff and allow them the freedom to be able to just sort of explore what's in their mind,
Mm.
they can do the work of figuring out what they need to work on. I'm not going to call you out on it. I'm not saying you're sexist, racist. That's a word I rarely use. You figure that out.
Mm.
And if you don't want to be that, if that's not who you thought you were, then you govern yourself accordingly.
Mm.
Handle your business.
Wow. And I can go on and on because you give out so much wisdom, and I love it that you have it with your company. And it is practical, but it's like, having people to think. But one of the things I'll just say before we complete is like what you said is like, I don't have to take on that thought process as my own. Whatever viewpoint that I had about this person or hair or anything, your company and what you've developed is that people can just see it for themselves and just let it go. So I really see healing too.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Yes. Healing.
Yeah.
Because it takes a toll on us to have that kind of judgmental approach to life. Let
Wow.
it go. People
Yeah.
get to make choices.
Yes.
And that's the choice they made. May not be the choice you make, but it's the choice they made, and it's okay.
Awesome. So with your company, where is it, and how can people reach you, and what does that look like? I know you have a website.
Practicaldiversity.com, all one word, practicaldiversity.com. They can reach me through that.
Okay.
Email me, DawnDBA, couldn't be simpler, at Gmail or at practicaldiversity.com. There are links on it to be able to reach me.
Okay.
But yeah,
Do you have any social media links, or I know
I do. All of them are Dawn DBA. So at Instagram, Facebook, if you Google me, I'm there. You can't miss me.
Yeah, I have to admit, when you reached out to me, I was like, let me Google her. And I'm like, oh, this is the so glad you reached out to me. And I'm looking forward to working with you more. And I just get a chance to see you and speak to you, and you get to share, and not just with me, but with the world, what you're up to. And I just thank you for, like I said, the pioneer of diversity in ways that we didn't even know was possible. And is it beyond the hair? Is it beyond racism? Is it beyond all that? But it's about love and healing for all of us. So wow.
Yes. And thank you again for the work that you are doing, Tammy. And I know when you've got as much on your plate as you do, you're doing your schoolwork, you're doing your work, you're, a mother. I mean, all of that takes its toll. But you're still putting in the work to get the world to change. And I love it.
Oh, thank you.
If there's any way I can be of help to you in doing that, please let me know.
We'll do it. And I'm going to have you back, and I'm looking to work with you because I know what I'm up to, what you're up to. I can see a collaboration opportunity. I'm looking forward to that. And I'll come back with you with that.
Awesome.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for being with us.
Okay.
And I'll see you soon. Okay.
Okay. All right. Continued good luck.
Yes, ma'am. Mwah. See you soon.
Thanks for listening.
Bye.
If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to support the show, please share it with others. Post about it on your social media. Leave a rating and review. Thanks again, and we'll see you soon.